Now that you know what a vector dataset is, it's time to add one to your first map. So here's the code from your first map. Recall that this map just has a single layer, a tile layer. Now a tile layer is actually a raster layer. The layer displays an image, and an image is a raster format. What we want to do now is add a vector layer. This vector layer is going to display one location on the map. I'm going to set it to display an icon in the town that I grew up. That town is Hornsey on the east coast of the UK. Now I have the coordinates already pulled off of Google for it, so first I'm going to create a variable with those coordinates. Now using those coordinates, I need to create a point geometry. A point, if you recall, is simply an XY value. Remember that I said that points, lines, and polygons are also known as features. In OpenLayers, you can create features which will then be displayed in the vector layer. Each feature has a geometry, and in the case of a location marker, that geometry is a point that locates the feature on the map. So we're going to come in here and add a point. Now you can see here that the point class takes a set of coordinates. And just as we did for the center coordinates for the view, we need to transform our latitude and longitude into the projected coordinates. Now that we have our point, we can go ahead and create our feature. So here I've just created a new instance of the ol.feature class, and similar to the layers and the view, the feature class in its constructor takes an object of options. The only option that we need to pass in at this point is the geometry, which is the point that we just created. I'm also going to give this feature an ID. We'll see this ID again a little later. So now we have a feature. The next thing that we need to do is to create a layer that will hold the feature. So here's our new layer variable, myVectorLayer, and it's simply an instance of ol.layer.vector. This is almost identical to how we created the tile layer earlier. And just like with the tile layer, we have to provide a source. However, we haven't created a source yet, so we need to go ahead and do that now. So here's our source. It's simply an instance of ol.source.vector. And again, we have a list of options. The option that we're passing in is the features option, which is an array containing all the features that we want in our source. We currently only have a single feature, and so we're just passing that in. So you can see how we've built this up. We began with the coordinates, we created a point geometry from those coordinates, and then we created a feature whose geometry was that point. Next, we created a source which houses the features. And then finally, we create a new layer which uses that source. Now, all that's left to do is add our vector layer to the list of layers for the map. So we just come down to My Layers and add in my vector layer. So we're going to refresh the map and then pan over to the UK. And you can see here that small blue circle. That is our feature. I can go ahead and zoom in. You can see it stays the same size no matter how I zoom in. This is the default styling for a feature. And there's Hornsey, where I grew up. So that's pretty good. But as you can see here, that circle is kind of hard to see. What we'd like to be able to do is to style that marker somehow so that we can see it better. So in order to style a feature, we actually have to create a style. So I'm going to jump back up here to before we define the feature, and let's see how we create this style. Before I create the style, I'm going to create a couple other variables. I'll first paste in the code, and then we'll talk through it. Okay, so the first variable is named stroke. Stroke in OpenLayers defines the color and width of a line. So if you were to draw a circle, the outside boundary of the circle would be the stroke. Here we're creating a stroke which is black in color and has a width of 2 pixels. Next we have the gold fill variable. Fill, as it sounds, is just the color that fills up a shape. So now we have a stroke and a fill color, we can go ahead and create a style. What I want to do here is to create a square with a black stroke on the outside and filled with gold inside. So here's our square style. We're just creating an instance of the ol.style.style class. And again, we're passing in a generic object with some options. Now in this case, the only option we're passing in is this image value. However, we're not using an actual image here. We're not using a PNG or a JPEG or something like that. We're creating our own, kind of on the fly. In order to do that, we're using the ol.style.regularShape class, which is a nice little helper class that OpenLayers provides for creating regular shapes. Things like triangles, squares, that kind of thing. Simple shapes. In the options for the regular shape, you can see that we're passing the fill and stroke that we defined earlier. We're also passing points with a value of 4. That indicates a square. A square has 4 points. Now radius for a square might sound strange since you would assume circle, but here you can assume a radius of 10 would mean that the square fits inside a circle with a radius of 10. And then finally we have the angle. This allows us to rotate the shape. Now by default, the square is actually drawn sitting on one of its corners, so it looks more like a diamond. In order to draw it sitting on one of its sides, we have to rotate it a little bit, 45 degrees to be precise. However, the angle value here takes radians and not degrees, so that's what we're doing here. We're taking the value of pi and dividing it by 4, and that is the equivalent in radians of 45 degrees. If you slept through trigonometry and you don't remember how to convert degrees to radians, don't worry about it too much. Simply remember that pi radians is the equivalent of 180 degrees, and then the math is simple. 90 degrees is pi over 2. 45 degrees, pi over 4. If we jump down a few lines, you can see I've also added this feature.setStyle and passed in the square style variable. This is assigning the style to the feature. So we come back to our map and refresh, and now when we pan over, we can see the gold square with the black stroke. Still located in the same position over Hornsea, but now much easier to see.